All right, everyone's on mute. Thank you so much. So I just want to say I am really excited for today. We have Lyon Terry with us, and I first met Lyon actually at my daughter's school at Lawton Elementary in Seattle, and Lyon taught fourth grade. Lyon, how long did you teach fourth grade for?
Well, I taught fourth grade for about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, and I taught second grade and third grade, and yeah. Mhm.
And now Lyon is currently with the Highline School District in an administrator role. And which school are you at currently?
I'm at Mount View Elementary School in White Center.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And Lyon is a Teacher of the Year for the Washington for 2015. And also, Lyon has also done a tremendous amount of work around social emotional learning and working with some of the leading national institutes, writing articles, helping with reports. And we are at Central currently focused really on social emotional learning, and we have a grad class that's brand new this summer that we launched. And so I wanted to bring in a guest speaker, somebody with a lot of expertise around social emotional learning, not only at the national level, but at the state level and also like on the ground. And because a lot of our teachers really want to push themselves further into learning about social emotional learning, as well as learning about specific strategies, ideas of how to sort of launch that in their classroom. So I'm just really excited to have Lyon join us today. So Lyon, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. And if you don't mind, I'll kick us off with our first question, or do you want to? Yep, perfect.
No, that's great. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. This is unusual format, of course, but it's great to see you all, and hopefully I can be helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we typically have Lyon come in person, so this is a little different, but safer. So how did you? I'm really curious to know about like how did you start in social emotional learning? You've been teaching elementary for a while. What did you see that was in the need in the classroom that kind of spurred you to really go deeper into social emotional learning?
Well, maybe I should go back just a little bit to talk about kind of my life growing up, and then I'll get there, I promise. This is me. Can you see that picture of me as a fourth grader? That's my fourth grade class picture. And I was the kid in elementary school who pretty much hated school, right? Like I don't remember any of my teachers, kindergarten through fifth grade. And it's not because I didn't work hard or didn't do well. I did reasonably, I guess, but I pretty much hated sitting down and being still. And I didn't want to be be in a classroom where I just had to sit there and listen to somebody all day long. I liked recess and I liked PE, and that's kind of what I went to school for. I used to actually move so much that I wore holes in the tops of my shoes, because I would wiggle my toes in order to not move and not be so fidgety during class. Like that's the way I behaved in school, was by wiggling my toes. And so like life for me as a kid was like just crazy. And so both my parents were educators, and as a high schooler and as a college kid, I definitely was like, I'm definitely not going to become a teacher. And then when I graduated from college, the job I got was as a preschool teacher, and kind of fell in love with the whole like educating kids and working with kids and being in a room full of kids. And so I became a teacher. And I guess the thing that kind of got me to that point where I knew that social emotional learning is because I thought about the kids in my classroom. I think of Ella, one of my students I had, who had special needs, right? And so like the way her brain was developing, even in third and fourth grade, I had her in third and then again in fourth grade, she was not going to become a reader. And I thought to myself, my whole career has been about creating these writers and these readers, and creating these academic superstars in my class. And I had done a pretty good job with that. And I thought, well, what's my goal for Ella? And it can't be that she's going to be a great reader because her brain wasn't developing that way. And so it got to the point where it's like, okay, I have to redefine what I think I want for these kids. And what I ended up wanting was for the kids to be good people, right? When I really thought about my why and thinking about what it was that like, why I got into this job and why I was doing what I was doing, it was because I wanted kids to be good people. And so I started to redefine, kind of what I wanted as for my students to be. And I wanted them to be good people who can solve problems, who can work with others and persevere and overcome difficulties and overcome failure and make mistakes and that sort of thing. And that's what I want for my kids, is for them to be able to do that work. And so I guess then when I started to examine my why, I started to think, okay, well, what is it that means? And what that means is that they need the social skills to exist in the world. And they need to have the emotional skills to be successful in life, right? No matter how great a reader or writer or mathematician they are, they need those skills. And in fact, there were some studies that came out not that long ago, a while ago, I guess, from where people interviewed executives at places like Google and Microsoft and such. And what they said was they don't actually want, the straight A students and that sort of thing, is they want the people who can get along with others. And they want the people who can, solve problems together and work collaboratively in their environments and that sort of thing. And I started thinking, well, that changes the whole nature of what school is for. And so it kind of fell in my lap that social emotional learning was the thing that we needed to start promoting for our students. And you see this in kind of all sorts of places. And so then, I started to like investigate places like CASEL. Here's the CASEL website and their essential, basically their standards. And the other thing that got me into it was that I started I read the Durlock study, 2001, and basically it said that when you have a social emotional learning curriculum and it's taught well and people do it in your school, the academic scores go up. So I started thinking, well, dang, that's pretty cool. Like if we teach this like fun stuff, then the kids are actually going to do better academically. So like it's a win-win in all sorts of ways, right? We're going to create good people that businesses want, and we're going to create good people for our society and good citizens for our country, and they're going to do better academically. So, our test scores are going to go up. So it was like, it started to be a little bit of a no-brainer to me that this is what I need to focus on. So that's kind of where I was at.
And Lyon, as you began to dig into this work, your work has kind of spanned a lot of different areas. Can you highlight some of the work that you've done in social emotional learning?
Yeah, so one of and sorry, I'm kind of looking away. I'm working on two screens here. So I'm kind of looking at my other screen where I'm going to show some. Once I kind of understood that was what we needed, was social emotional learning in our schools, I started doing it. Like I was a successful teacher already, but I was like, I'm just going to do this. Like my students need it, and that's what we need. And so I just started, like, I would play guitar every day in my classroom, and I had a morning meeting, and I would greet every student at the door by name and do all of these things that I just knew were the right thing to do. But I was worried, I was working at a school at the time that had multiple different principals, right? So each principal comes in and they have a different focus and a different thing. And suddenly the word fidelity started to be batted around and that sort of thing. And I'm like, uh-oh, this is, I'm worried, and standards were adopted, and oh, you got to teach the standards and make sure you're teaching the standards. And I started to worry that all of this social emotional learning work that I was doing had to be kind of hidden, that I wasn't able to bring it out in the open and be like, no, this is actually good for our kids, and we're going to do this because it's the right thing to do, not because it's aligned to standards or, and so I got in touch with a group in Washington called the SEL for WA, and it turns out they were actually advocating for social emotional standards in our state. And so I actually went to Olympia and advocated on behalf of the social emotional learning standards. And they adopted, they created a work group like the state legislature and the governor created a work group for social emotional learning standards for us to develop our own standards. And I actually worked with the Washington State Social Emotional Learning Benchmark Group and created these, the 6 standards that we now have. And these are the ones that I'm sharing on the screen here, Washington Social Emotional Learning Standards and Benchmarks. And so I worked with the state group on this, a whole bunch of educators from around the state. And that was really exciting to me to like be part of this. And just on January 1st, Chris Reichdahl adopted the standards as like an official set of standards for our state. And to me, that's like, that gives us as educators that backup to say to a principal or to say to anybody, no, I can take 20 minutes out of my day, or I can take, an hour out of my week to like teach social emotional learning because it's an adopted standard in our state, just like our reading and writing and math standards are. So it's not something we can ignore, and it's not something that we have to kind of put underneath, in the recesses of our stuff. It needs to be something that's on the forefront. After working with that, I then worked with another group called through the I was invited by the Aspen Institute to work on this report. So to work on the National Commission on Social Emotional Academic Development. And we created this report called From a Nation at Risk to a Nation at Hope. And in this report, there are recommendations about how to integrate social emotional learning with our academic standards, and recommendations for actions both in the classroom and in the administrative level and at all levels. One thing that I know teachers will appreciate is this link up here, videos, what this looks like. They partnered with Edutopia. I think it's going to go to that. Yeah, they partnered with Edutopia, and they created a whole bunch of videos about how learning happens and the different ways that we can foster social emotional learning in our classrooms. The basic outcome of this report was that learning only happens when social emotional learning is present, right? That if we don't actually like focus on the social and the emotional aspect of our schools, then learning is not going to happen. And in fact, if we don't integrate it, it's the academics don't. So it takes it kind of the next step. It's not just like a study that says like if you try to have these programs, but like all learning is social emotional. And so these videos that they've created here are really excellent. Short videos, 5 minutes or less, that really get kids or teachers thinking about how to implement social emotional learning in their classrooms at all different levels. So they really did an excellent job with this report. So I felt really privileged to work with that group there, and that's some of the places I've worked. I've also written a guest essay for the Seattle Times. I've given TED-style talks, and I wrote a guest essay with the Seattle Times about the importance of social emotional learning and how to integrate it into your classroom. So, and I'll talk about some of those things today as we move on.
Got some stuff to say about social emotional learning.
I do have some things to say about it. Yeah, I've spent some time thinking about it.
I love it. So you did mention OSBI, and you mentioned the standards, and you did highlight some benefits that it sort of foregrounds and centers social emotional learning in the classroom as something that should have focus and attention to and be attended to, right? So I'm wondering if there are other benefits, and then also more specifically, I'm wondering like, what do you worry about? So you've done sort of pushed on this policy to have social emotional standards in the implementation and fidelity of trying to implement those social emotional standards. What gives you worry?
I guess what gives me worry is that teachers have a lot on their plates. There is a lot of things that we have to worry about as teachers. You have to worry about as teachers. It's weird for me. I taught for 25 years and now I'm not a teacher anymore. So I have to like change my brain a little bit, but still think of myself as an educator. What worries me is things like, standards-based education, that we have to adhere to all the standards and we have to make sure we get through every single standard every year. It worries me the emphasis on the tests and the high stakes testing and those sorts of things. Those are some of the things that worry me, because, you know, like, it adds more to the plate of a teacher and takes away that time for creativity and for relationship building and for voice, choice, and relevance, and some of those things that we know are important to our kids and that we actually know help academics. But it's so hard to remember those things when you're like, oh, this, you know, I only have 2 weeks. I worry about scope and sequence, you know, timelines that say you have to teach this for 2 weeks and this for 2 weeks and that for 2 weeks. And, you know, if you don't get to it, then, you know, you're in trouble, and, you know, those sorts of things, right? And so those are the kinds of things that worry me as an educator, that that could get in the way of social emotional learning. So, you know, we need to focus on things like creating a welcoming classroom and greeting kids every day by their name, by their proper name, and asking them, how are you feeling today? And, you know, checking in with every one of our students every day. We need to focus on things like creating spaces in our classroom that reflect our students, that show them that we understand who they are as whole people. And we need to create spaces that are diverse. And we need to create spaces that are multiple different varieties, not just like desks and rows or even desks and groups, but spaces that have, you know, different types of desks and different types of, you know, comfort areas and calm down corners and carpets and, you know, those sorts of spaces that welcome students into our classroom and know that, and allow them to know that we're going to care about them. So those are some of the things that we need to carve out time for in our schedule. I was at a conference just yesterday. I heard from this author, Chris M.Ed. He's a middle school teacher, and he said, I don't want a sanitized version of you. I want your unapologetic self to know you're welcomed in this classroom. And it just made me, you know, like, reminded me of the importance of, you know, knowing our kids when they enter our classroom, and, you know, accepting them for who they are when they enter our buildings. And those sorts of things, I think, are just essential for making a classroom a place that's going to flourish for every kid.
Those are some great points that you made. And I was wondering too, is if a teacher is thinking about how to adopt these social emotional learning, or they just want to do it because they know that's the work that they should be doing. You know, and if there's no school-wide support, like a ruler or step 2 in their school, you know, I think you provided some really wonderful sort of moves that they can take to begin to do that work. Do you have any other advice for a teacher that's in maybe a school or school system that doesn't have sort of broader support or programs in place and is sort of on their own?
Mm-hmm. I do, not surprisingly, I guess, because I was in those schools for many years, right? Like, you know, now I'm in the Highline School District. Even Seattle had ruler tools and second step tools, and those are nice. But I have to say, like, you know, the thing to remember, just like the Nation at Hope report says, is that SEL is not a canned program. It's not something you do as an add-on half an hour a day or 20 minutes in the morning or once a week, you know, at class meeting, although those are important. It's something you do all the time, every day, right? And so it needs to be integrated to everything you do. So as I said, like, I would greet every student when they enter my classroom. I would play guitar every morning and, you know, go over our daily schedule, have a consistent routine in my classroom every day. And when that routine was broken, I would explain why and how to each of the kids, so everybody knew what was coming and what to expect in the course of the day. At the beginning of the year, I always showed this movie. Let me show you just the beginning of this movie. I don't know if you can give me a thumbs up if you can hear this when it plays. Otherwise, I'm not going to show the whole thing, but I just want to show you the beginning of it. Can you hear that? No. Okay. Well, this movie, The Science of Character, is talking about this unique character that all of us have. And they've actually done some studies about the essential character strengths that all people have. And these character strengths that are, you can highlight here. Let me see if I can make this full screen so you can see that better. These character strengths are strengths that all kids have and all people have. And we have them in different levels, right? And what we need to do is focus on the strengths that we have. And so I would actually show this video to kids. It's only an 8-minute video. And we talk about what our character strengths are and how we show those character strengths. And what we do as, when, if we're like really thinking that kindness and love are our character strengths, then, what is it that shows those character strengths and those sorts of things? And if we have humor or we have self-control, like, well, how is that a character strength for us? And how can I foster that character strength and those sorts of things? So I would spend a lot of time at the beginning of the year talking about those kinds of character strengths. Sorry, I started again. And let me just show you one of the things I did so actually one thing we would do for self-awareness, which is what, like kind of the first social emotional learning standard from Castle and from the Washington State standards, is I would have kids draw a self-portrait of themselves and then label their character strengths around it, around their self-portrait and the character strength of them doing something. Or I would have the kids, where was it? Here in this PowerPoint I created one time, here are the I had this student look at this, Caroline N. She says, one of her character strengths is courage because I try new things and go out of my comfort zone. Oh, wow. And she was saying, oh, I'm going to try doing gymnastics in front of people, right? Like, how can I show courage? And she would, like, we're focusing on character strengths and the things that they can do as individuals, right? And how they can show those character strengths. So that's just, one way I would bring those in. But I think if you don't have a curriculum and you don't have it, you need to think about how you're integrating it every day. And that is in every lesson, right? So think about what is your social emotional learning goal of a lesson. Let's say you're talking about, how to identify a plot points in a book or something like that. And so you're doing a read aloud and you're going to have the kids turn and talk. Well, you're also going to say, okay, our goal for the lesson today is to, understand the different elements of the plot, but also our goal today in our lesson is to listen well to your classmate when they speak. And what does that look like? What does that sound like? And I will actually take 2 minutes out of my lesson and say, what that looks like is you turn to them and your eyes are on them when they're speaking, or that when you talk after them, you say, I agree or I disagree with, right? Just little things like that you're showing kids that this is how you listen, and this is how you can show those social emotional learning skills within the course of the lesson.
That modeling.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that modeling that you just described is so important that you can't.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
We sometimes would do like even a fishbowl thing where like some kids would practice what it looks like to turn and talk to a partner and to allow one person to go first and then allow the other person to add on. Well, in addition to what you said, I agree or I disagree with, or in addition to, I think that because, and it would be all those sorts of things. And we need to intentionally teach those things. Kids don't just know that is the way to behave in our classrooms. And so I think it's important that they know that we have those goals as well.
That's awesome.
So that open-ended questioning, even things like small changes in our language. One of the things I learned, a number of years ago now, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, after 20 years of teaching, was that don't ask what questions, don't ask, do you have any questions? Because that assumes that questions are something they shouldn't have. Assume that, ask, what questions do you have? Because that assumes that questions are okay and it's great to have questions. So we ask, what questions do you have? And that, of course, assumes that everybody has a question and everybody's going to not understand something, and that's okay, right? And whereas, like that sort of open-ended questioning is just really important for things like social awareness and helping kids be aware of themselves and how they interact with the world. So it's just little things like that I think are really important for integrating social emotional learning in our daily lives.
I love it.
In our daily instruction.
You talked about self-awareness and specifically, that links up to CASEL and there's so much alignment between the CASEL framework and the OSBI standards. And so if you wouldn't mind, I'm wondering if you could just provide maybe a a example or a strategy that you use around the class? You talked about self-awareness, but I'm wondering about self-management, social awareness, the relationship skills, and decision-making. Do you mind sharing maybe a strategy or two under each of those?
No, I can go into some of those. So I talked a little bit about self-awareness and helping kids understand who they are. And I think that's really important, especially to be culturally responsive. Like we really need to we need to be ourselves in the school. I showed my 4th grade picture in this little talk, and I think that's really important that you show who you are in your classroom and reveal something of who you are, right? So I used to play guitar in the classroom. I'm not a great guitarist, but I like music and I like singing. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to play guitar, and I would mess up all the time. And I was modeling self-awareness. In terms of self-management, so many teachers, it was my experience, that got frustrated with little things like, oh, the kids don't have a pencil, or the kids don't know, their papers are all over their desk and it's a mess, right? I'm like, well, did you teach them how to sharpen a pencil? I used to do a lesson with my 2nd graders and 4th graders on how to put a piece of paper into a folder, right? Okay, you open the folder, you pull up the thing, and you put your hand on top of the paper and slide it in. We would practice that. I would practice what it looks like to be organized in terms of keeping your desk neat, right? We can't say just it's time to clean your desk. We can say, this is what a clean desk looks like, and this is how to go about organizing and cleaning your desk, right? So that self-management thing, it's okay to teach that. In fact, we have to teach that. That's our job, right? So I think, those sorts of things. I also would focus on the learning line. This is something, you guys are still seeing my screen, yeah. So the learning line was something really important in my classroom that I thought was just super important for that self-management thing. The kids knew their job when they came to my classroom was to move up the learning line, but there are ways to do that, right? And every day was something that we were doing and moving up the learning line. Of course, I always put myself on this line somewhere too. Oh, I didn't on this one this year, I guess. I would think of myself as a college graduate and think, okay, here I am, I'm up here, so I'm doing something, continuing up the learning line, right? And those are the things that we do. In terms of social awareness, one time we did a class write about what it looks like and sounds like on the playground. And we talked about the things we observed and the sounds we heard, and we wrote a class poem all about the playground and what it looked like and sounded like, right? And I think those are some of the, the social awareness. The ruler skills from Mark Brackett. He wrote this book, Permission to Feel, and that I've just been reading. And he has all those ruler skills like the mood meter and the meta moment and the blueprint that I think are really valuable for kids in terms of their social awareness and starting to do perspective taking and that sort of thing. And I think that helps with relationship skills, right? Which is also another thing that's really important. I also already talked about some of the, sentence starters that were in my classroom in terms of relationship skills. Like kids knew in my classroom, they didn't need to like everybody, but they needed to know how to talk to everybody. And what that means is you can say things like, I disagree with you because, or I agree with you because. And so I think that was really important to develop those relationship skills. One of the things I started doing toward the end of my career too was that to develop those relationship skills is I would do random partnerships. So I had, a stick cup, random student generator magic cup with all their names on it. And I would pull out, and they would have a reading partner for a month or so, and I would pull out the sticks. And they would have a reading partner based on that. Rather than me, and having my implicit bias judge like who was going to be best partners and that sort of thing, I let the stick judge it, and then kids had to develop relationship skills with whomever happened to come out of the jar, just like we have to do in our regular lives in any job, is get along with anybody. And I had to teach them the skills of how to get along with anybody.
And
in terms of decision making is the one other thing I wanted to talk about. And to me, that was the power of words like yes and yet. I always felt like I had a great day of teaching when I said yes a lot more than I said no. And at the same time, thinking of the power of the word yet, right? So students in my class learned right away that they couldn't say, I don't know how to, because I would just say yet, right? And I don't know how to do this yet. And I had the big sign up on my, big word yet up on my wall that said that. And so that they knew that they were there to learn and that they could make a decision to work harder at this or ask a question and that sort of thing. In the same way, like we have to think about every lesson, how are we providing choice for our students, right? So do they have a choice of what book to read? Do they have a choice of what article to read? Do they have a choice of what kind of, what to write about? Do they have a choice of which math problems to solve or how to solve a math problem? Do they have a choice of which kind of science experiment to do? Like, it's really important that we're providing choice for our students so they're learning about how to provide, how to make good choices for themselves as learners. And that's some decision making that's the last standard there.
I think it's wonderful because you are really highlighting the importance of integrating social emotional learning instead of, like you mentioned earlier, like instead of just 20-minute, which is great. A morning meeting I love morning meetings, but I think it's also just being intentional throughout the whole day, especially in your interactions, of how to really highlight those social emotional learning.
Yeah, it's not something you can just do. It's something that is part of what you do. It's not a program. It's not a one-off thing. It is a way we teach. To provide choice and decisions and self-awareness and social awareness. It is part of every lesson.
I'm wondering, so social emotional learning is really gained a lot of momentum of late. And it's interesting because I've been digging into it, and I had a conversation with a teacher, and she said, well, I'm letting my kids have independent time, and that's my way of doing social emotional learning, right? And I was like, okay, well, what are your outcomes from doing that? Like, what are you trying to foster? But for this teacher, she just thought simply the activity, the act of having students having independent time in her class was enough to check that box of social emotional learning. And that's concerning, but there's also other criticisms of programs or teachers trying to fix kids from us taking on sort of a deficit lens of kids coming in. And again, I appreciate your sort of what are your strengths. So I saw evidence of you specifically thinking your students with an asset lens of thinking like, what are your character strengths that you can bring in? Yep. And then there's other criticism around culturally responsive teaching, and that most of, our teachers are white. And, I know, for example, when I taught in Renton School District, majority of our students were of color. So there's a big disconnect. So I'm wondering, in terms of criticisms, in your opinion, are these sort of justified? And what do you recommend are ways that we can, social emotional learning programs and also teachers can address this? Big question.
The biggest criticism that I've heard about teaching social emotional learning is that it's a way to get kids to calm down, particularly our kids of color and that sort of thing. Oh no, we're just trying to regulate their emotions and make them like the other white kids. And if we're doing that, we are doing it wrong, right? Because you are absolutely correct in that we have predominantly white teaching corps and a majority kids of color in our schools at this point. And it's not okay for us as white educators to kind of use social emotional learning as a tool to, foster white supremacy, if you will, and maintain the systems of oppression that we already have. I think, social emotional learning is all about welcoming all kids for who they are and what they bring to our classroom. And, that whole self-awareness piece is great. In fact, I heard a quote recently from Dina Simmons, who works with Mark Brackett at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And she says, if we're not actively being anti-racist with our social emotional learning, we're actually not doing social emotional learning well. So we have to think about things like, how are we allowing students to feel in our classroom and allowing students to solve problems in our classroom? And are we not causing harm? Because we all have an implicit bias in the things that in our lives, right? We all bring bias to the situation, especially when you're a white teacher working with predominantly with any kids of color. we have to be really cautious about what our bias is and how we're bringing that bias to our classrooms. And we need to do things that take away that bias as best we can. And so some of those things include like using a random student generator, like a stick jar. But we also need to do things like be upfront with our students and ourselves about where we come from and who we are, and that we're learning and growing and that sort of thing. But we also need to provide students with a safe place to share their feelings. And we need to do things like teach mindfulness and exercise breathing, and teach things that make kids feel good about themselves and about who they are. So and not allow some of the trauma-inducing things to enter our schools or our classroom. Things like behavior clip charts, right? So when a student is asked to shamefully go up in front of the class and move their clip down from green to yellow or to red or something like that, or removing recess from kids, or even things like mom and me breakfast for kids who don't have a mom anymore or never had a mom, or things like even countdowns to summer, because summer can be a trauma-inducing time for kids with less structure and that sort of thing, right? We need to do things like build up relationships with our students and our families. We need to give positive notes to kids. We need to give them special jobs and know that each kid is going to need a unique response when they have a discipline issue or when they have a challenge in their lives, right? And so I think we need to look for things like the root cause of the behavior and listen to the student in a quiet space, and not call them out in front of the class, but bring them out in the hall and have a conversation with them and teach them about how to have a restorative conversation with a friend when they've done harm. I think all of these things are things we can do, and we have to stop doing. So my biggest worry about bringing social emotional learning into our schools, honestly, is that suddenly it's going to be a new grade or a new metric that, a new data point that teachers and administrators and school districts are going to suddenly use to punish or hold back kids and that sort of thing. And so that's what I worry about mostly, is that it's going to be a punitive thing. And so, even the recommendation from the state is that it's not about giving a grade or anything like that. It's about helping kids be better people. So I don't know. I hope that helps answer that question.
Yeah, no, that's a big hairy question with a lot of criticism. So I appreciate you narrowing down and addressing that. Trauma.
It's important, I guess, when you hear the criticisms, that you actually are looking at what is it that they're criticizing about that, because very few of the criticism articles, it's not like, if we're using social emotional learning as a tool to maintain white supremacy, that's clearly a problem. But most people who write that as their headline are really in support of social emotional learning. Like, if you read Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, she's all about relationships. Loretta Hammond, she's all about relationships and, building, the cognitive resources and finding student interests and fostering those interests and that sort of thing, and making that part the central part of what you're doing, which is, to me, social emotional learning, but not a way to, foster white supremacy.
Yeah. Have a quiet classroom, don't talk. Yeah,
right. Yeah, those sorts of things, like, not okay. Right.
So there is, in addition, running sort of parallel to social emotional learning, there's a lot of intersection though between trauma-informed practices and social emotional learning. And there's a lot of blurring of line, which is probably a really good thing. Really having educators becoming more aware of ACEs. And you talked earlier a little bit about sort of behavior as a function of some kind of root cause. And so can you talk a little bit about where you are seeing social emotional learning and trauma-informed practices sort of coming together? And are we doing enough as educators to sort of address this at a classroom level as well as a systems level?
Yeah, I guess I need to focus mostly on the classroom level. I have to highlight one thing. Let me delete some of these windows that I have open so I can find it. No, not that. There's a Nadine Burke Harris wrote a book called The Deepest Well. And it is just a powerful book about ACEs and about, oh, sorry, I can't find, oh no, here it is. Yeah, here she is, Nadine Burke Harris. She actually gave a TED talk. She's a doctor who gave a TED talk about how childhood trauma affects health. So it was actually like ACEs are incredible, have an incredible impact on our students, right? And adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. And so she goes into all of the medical reasons why this trauma is harming our students and their ability to learn in schools. And what I loved about, like, boy, I read through the whole book and I was like, wow, this is so powerful. This is excellent science and that sort of thing. And I was just waiting for the prescription, like, what do we do about this, right? And it got to the end and I'm like, oh, it's SEL stuff, right? It's like building a relationship with kids, like letting them have feelings, letting them express their feelings, letting them, have a calm down space in your classroom. Like, it's not rocket science to like figure out what to do to be trauma informed and to think about, what we do, or like to be culturally responsive, to like know your neighborhood and know the culture that your students are coming from, so you can have a conversation with them about the soccer game that they played on the weekend, or like the walk to school, or about the big tree in the neighborhood, or about the restaurant that just closed. I mean, all of these things, when we know our community, that's going to help our students feel connected to us and help us build a relationship with our students. I just went to there's this great teacher, Annalisa McCann, who was actually the 2020 or 2019 Regional Teacher of the Year. She teaches out in the Spokane area, and she has this great website called Teaching with Trauma in Mind. And I just went to one of her things. I just want you to look at some of her. She talks about trauma-invested teaching, and look at her classroom. You can see the varied spaces, the inviting spaces, and those sorts of things that she creates in her classroom that make kids feel welcomed and appreciated, and allows for different feelings and emotions to be in her classroom. She talks about the things that the deepest well, this is a slide deck that she shared with me, that the things we need to teach our kids to like about in our school is how to get your brain ready to learn. And it's things like how much sleep is right for our kids, what good nutrition is, how important exercise is. We need to practice mindfulness with our kids and practice mental health, and how to have healthy relationships. All of these things are the things we're teaching about when we're teaching social emotional learning skills, right? And anybody ever done Go Noodle before? Like, Go Noodle is this wonderful little brain break activity where you can do like 2 to 5 minute little videos of dancing and moving, or mindfulness activities, and all sorts of great stuff. And so those are some of the things that Annalisa and Nadine Burke Harris talk about as being great for creating a learning ready brain. Mark Brackett talks about it too. Like, we need to teach our kids how to breathe, just what it means to breathe and to take a couple of deep breaths. And we need to practice that in our classroom and teach it, or how to express gratitude, to say thank you to someone in an authentic way. These are the kinds of things that this doctor and these other teachers are saying, these are the things that are trauma informed, that help our kids overcome their trauma.
Well, I appreciate the exercise piece, because too often I still see teachers taking away recess as a form of punishment to sort of classroom management.
Right, and taking away recess is a big one. That's a big no-no. Just like the clip charts are, right? Like, our kids often need more recess, and I was that kid, right? I needed more recess, right? And like, this is what Annalisa has in her classroom, at-home calm down kits, right? So that she brings at-home calm down kits. She teaches kids how to use her break spot. So in the classroom, and it's not a punishment. It's like, I can see you're dysregulated right now, and you need to work on that. So here, take 3 to 5 minutes and go to this corner, and this is what you might do there to help your brain calm down. And these, I've taught you the breathing exercises that you can try, and I'll check in with you. right? And those sorts of things are things that we need to have. And, as a system, I'm more of the systems guy now because I'm looking at a whole school. When I get a call from a teacher that says, this kid was sent out of my classroom, he was hitting somebody, da, 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 da. The first thing I say to that kid has nothing to do with the incident that happened. The first thing I say might be, look at what a nice day it is out today. Did you notice, or how'd you get to school today? Or tell me about your little brother, or, what'd you have for breakfast? Because we need to have this chance for our kids to understand that the whole of who they are is not their behavior. The whole of who they are is a much wider thing. And, this behavior thing has a root, and we'll get to that, but we need to build those relationships with our kids first. And so I'm thinking about how to not suspend kids, and how to build those relationships with kids that are different, so that they can open up about what they're doing and what their behaviors are and what might be the root of that behavior. So I think those are some of the things we can do and should be doing in our classrooms and in our schools to reduce suspensions and to reduce kids' time when kids are not in our classroom.
Yeah, and I know Highline School District has been really sort of leading in that front. So that's
I have to say, though, we've been going backwards of late, right? I arrived at Mountview a couple of years last year, and the year before they had over 800 referrals.
Wow.
In this K-5 elementary school, right? So 2 years ago, we had over 800 referrals from teachers, and many of those did lead to suspension, and many of them were things like wearing a hoodie in class, or a uniform violation, or disrespect, and those sorts of things. And we need to be just really cautious about that. I'm very careful about those things as an administrator, because I know my own bias comes in and the bias of our teachers comes in. So we need to make sure we're cognizant of those things.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, this was great strategies and resources you shared. I definitely will be stealing these ideas and incorporating back into my teacher ed classes. So this will have many ripples beyond just this quick talk that we're having. What advice do you have? And so what we're going to do is I'm going to ask this last question, and then I'm going to open it up to our students who are joining us to ask you questions as well. But the last question I have is what advice do you have for teachers and teacher candidates that want to go deeper and learn more about this? What you've mentioned a few, like the Deepest Well, looking maybe at the report of A Nation of Hope. What are some other ideas or moves that they should?
Another one of my favorite groups is Character Lab. This is created by Angela Duckworth and a group at University of Pennsylvania. She's got incredible playbooks. So these playbooks are little things like how to promote things like creativity and growth mindset. And it's just simple little things that you can do in your classroom about how to model it and celebrate and enable it. One of the things I loved about this growth mindset one is she talks about avoiding praise, right? We don't want to talk about our kids as smart or gifted or talented or the opposite, because we'd never call kids dumb, or we'd never call kids not smart, right? So we shouldn't also call them gifted or talented. We can say things like, I'm so proud of you. When you got stuck in that problem, you tried a different way to solve it and didn't give up, right? So it's little things like that this website is providing us for promoting these different character strengths. And so I really love Character Lab as a resource. And then definitely also the work from A Nation at Hope. And Mark Brackett's book, this book, Permission to Feel, that I've already talked about. I kind of hate the title, but I do think it's important that kids understand that they do have the right to have feelings in our classroom and to express those feelings, and to understand that it's okay to have feelings, and that we will help them get through some of those feelings. So I think that's some of the resources I have. I guess, just to kind of end this main part of it, is this quote here: students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? So we have to show we care for our kids, and then they're going to be ready to learn in our classrooms. So as much as we can do to show our students that we care for them by setting high expectations, by supporting them when they're struggling, by offering them spaces, and by greeting them by name and knowing their kids' names or their siblings' names or knowing their pets' names. Like, these are things that matter to our kids, and so we need to care about those things.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, let's go ahead and do you mind stop sharing on your screen, and I can bring up gallery view. And
I can stop sharing. There we go. Mm-hmm.
What questions do folks have that they would like to ask Lyon Terry?
Okay, I'll ask. So my question is, with all of these strategies, what are teachers, oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
What are teachers, what are good strategies that they're coming up with now that teachers cannot, interact with their students one-on-one besides the internet? Or is there really a good one? Or how do you even,
with the distance learning thing? Right?
Yes.
Right, it's super confusing. So I don't have a great answer for this, but it's definitely something I'm thinking about. Something we're going to be trying at Mount View is to have a kind of a family liaison. And so say you have 2 or 3 kids at the school, we're going to have one person who's the liaison from the school build a relationship with that family. So maybe it's they go and they meet in the backyard, or they meet in a park or something like that, and they have these conversations. And so they kind of think about who these kids are and what their strengths are, and have all these things so that they are better able to build those connections with the family and with the other, help the teachers better meet those kids' needs. Might be one way that we're going to try.
Do they act in terms of like an ombudsman, in a sense of like hearing the needs of the family and then helping communicate that through the system to the teachers and
right, and administrators and counselor and family support worker and that sort of thing, right? So that might be one way that we're hoping that that's one way that we can do that better. But in terms of the integrating this into our lessons, one of the things I saw with a lot of distance learning that happened in the spring was that teachers would create a YouTube channel or something like that, right? And they would just kind of, or on Seesaw or on Google Classroom, they would just record themselves kind of delivering a lesson for 10 minutes. And then the kids would have to reply, kind of fill out the answer to the worksheet question or whatever. And I would encourage us to really think about how to do synchronous lessons. So like right now, I love seeing your face. Shlita, is that how you say your name? And like I like seeing, and so the more we can do synchronous lessons like this, and not have someone talk for like 45 minutes like I've done, but actually like every 10 minutes have a breakout room for 1 minute that just says partners up 2 kids, and okay, you guys need to talk about this. How are you feeling right now? What do you think about this? Those sorts of things, so that there's more time for kids to talk and less time for teachers to just spend pontificating. I think that'll be one way we can do it. Yeah.
Okay, I have one more question. It's kind of off topic as far as students, but what are teachers receiving? I feel like teachers need some kind of support emotionally. So what are they receiving? Are they receiving anything, or it's more of?
Well, there's multiple things, like, at least at my school, like we do have, I think counselors have really been taking on some of that burden. So school counselors have been, working with teachers and helping them with some of the strategies that help them, just even like what Nadine Burke-Harris talks about in The Deepest Well, like, having exercise and getting good health and maintaining a consistent routine and that sort of thing. Like, we've talked a lot about that as a school, to help teachers, but we're also doing a lot of training for teachers around, how to do distance learning and how to do the technology tools so they feel more comfortable at it. And we're also like making sure that all the teachers have the correct devices and that sort of thing that they need in order to be successful in this. But yeah, it's a challenge. Like, we don't have good answers at this point.
I have a question for you.
Great.
So I actually am a teacher. I just finished my 2nd year teaching 1st grade at Clark Elementary.
Excellent.
So I I was thinking, like this whole time I was thinking about my first couple years of teaching, and we have second step curriculum. And when you're a first and second year teacher, it was so hard for me to not constantly just drown in the curriculum of the standards and reading and writing and everything. So I guess kind of my question is, what advice would you give to a first year teacher that's coming in and just knowing kind of like the state of mind they're going to be in, some strategies, strategies to integrate throughout their curriculum that would be doable, kind of knowing their experience level?
Yeah, let me say that I look back at my first couple of years teaching and I feel so sorry for those poor kids. Like I was, like, again, I was the same as you. I was just totally drowning in it. And I get, because there's just so much to teaching. It's a super complicated job, right? And that's one of the things I love about it. What I would focus on is those things first that are about relationship building, right? So that, what are you doing to know your kids, right? So anything that is like an art activity that involves them drawing or writing about themselves as who they are, or putting themselves in their favorite place in the world, or something like that, right? So that while they're doing this, you can go around and connect with kids and have those conversations with kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
Simple things like making sure that your daily routine is super clear to you and your kids, right? So whether your lessons are perfect or not, you know that, after reading comes recess, and after recess comes writing, and then like you have that clear in your brain, so that, your routines are good. And so then your routines can be little things like, when kids come in the morning, I greet every student by name and I look them in the eye so they know I'm caring for them, or I know how they're feeling. And same at the end of the day. They can't just run out of my classroom. They have to, even if it's chaos. I was never good at the end of the day, but the end of the day, even if it was chaos, they had to wait at their desk until I had them line up, and then they had to say goodbye to me individually. And so little things like that build relationships. I would focus on that, right? So think about, how are you going to build relationships, and what are your routines for the day? And, like, your lessons will get better. And that's just, you have to admit that, sometimes your lessons are not going to be great, but your kids, and they know you love them, and they know you care about them.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
I was thinking too, like, it would be really helpful for new teachers to think about routines through that different lens, like you talked about, like almost like content focused routines of like, how do I set up my schedule? A people focused routine, how do I greet my students? How do I make sure that they're welcomed and they feel like they belong? And then also just like the sort of logistical routines, right? How do you put papers into your folder, and the end of day routine? So I think that's really an interesting way of thinking about routines. We had a question in the chat from Glenda. She says, will you be developing a professional workshop that can support new teachers in applying social emotional learning in the classroom?
I don't know, is that a question for you, Eric, or a question for me?
I don't know.
I have no plans to develop a professional workshop, but I think it would be important to do so. But I mean, maybe this is part of what a professional workshop is.
Yeah. If it was directed towards me, I may apply for a grant in the next week or two around social emotional learning to help teacher candidates, for folks that are in the field to work on social emotional learning and have a professional learning community. And I don't see why we couldn't integrate in teacher candidates as well as part of that learning community. I think that would be a great way to bridge between the teacher ed programs and the field. I think we should be blurring those lines as often as we can. So I think that's
absolutely.
And
I'd be happy to work with you on that and support that in how it needs to be. Like, I guess the thing, and I hope that this has come through in this talk, like, so, like, first of all, you'll notice that I don't talk about SEL or SEL. I try to say social emotional learning, because I think it's important that we actually say out our acronyms to say it's about social. Oh, that's about kids getting along, about people being in the world. and it's about emotions. Oh, that's about understanding who we are and how I feel and how I, deal with feelings and where my feelings come from. I think it's really important that we, continue to have these conversations like that. And I'm really about kind of the way it works in a classroom and the things we need to do. So I hope that I've given you some ideas for like how to promote those social and emotional health for our kids. And I agree, Glenda, we do need some scenarios, right? That would be absolutely a way to play things out, right? To say things like, I should probably have given you more like, this is an example of something I did in my classroom.
Okay, we have time for one or two more questions. Who else has questions for us? Okay, Christine.
All right, I do. Okay, so building off of what Glenda was talking about and what Lyon was talking about having some sort of workshops. If we're looking at doing Zooms in the future with our students, what about the parents who aren't on board? I'm talking about, because the teachers, it sounds like, Lyon, you said you bought in. You definitely bought into social emotional learning right off the bat. And you said you had to kind of keep it hidden, but really what you were keeping hidden ended up being a great thing. And I'm glad that you got out there and started sharing it. But what about as we're doing Zooms and parents are not on board with social emotional learning, with the ones, and I'm talking about the ones that are like, what do you mean you want my child to talk about their feelings and things like that? That's a waste of time, is the scenario that I'm going through in my mind. And I'm not trying to be skeptical, I'm just trying to be questioning. So
Yep.
do you, as I look to the future, is this something that, number one, as a future teacher, do I just continue to have a growth mindset and figure out ways to learn as much as possible and help build those relationships with the parents and tell them all the reasons why it's a great idea to teach it? Or what I'm trying to look to the future.
First of all, like I have heard about that complaint from parents before, but I've never had a parent complain to me about that. In 25 years of teaching, I never had a parent say to me, oh no, I don't want my student to be, taught, about character or feelings or how to be a good person in the world. Like, I guess my only response to that is like, first of all, it's better for their academics. When kids know and are taught their social emotional learning needs, like that helps calm their brain and that helps prevent their flight or fight response. Like, we talk about, like Zaretta Hammond talks about in culturally responsive teaching. And so it makes them better academic students. And all parents want that. And the other goal is that like, we want them to be good people. And like, I guess I would ask the parent, well, what are your goals for your student? What are the things that I would like inquire more? Tell me more about your concerns about this, me focusing on some of these things with your student, like, and often it'll get to like, oh no, I want to be in charge of who they are as people. Well, that's great. I'm not taking that away from you. I mean, I think you can almost always say yes when a parent tries to like defend, or tries to tell you, no, you have to focus on, the 3 R's or whatever, right? Like, if that's what they're about, is say, oh no, the data supports that actually if we integrate social emotional learning with our academics, then kids are going to do better academically. So it's better for that. And if they want them to be, go to college, well, actually it's better for that. If they want them to get a job at Google, it's better for that. Or Amazon, like, that's what they want, right? So I think in a lot of responses is just like, I would go in with a listening mindset and, try to listen to what parents' concerns are, and often you will be able to see that what their concerns are your concerns as well, and that's why you're doing what you do.
I agree wholeheartedly. I never had a teacher or a parent complain, and then I'll put my parent hat on. My daughter started getting into social emotional learning, and I saw evidence in my home of that. So she was going to be in a conflict with her sister, and she said, "I need a meta moment." I'm like, "What? What's a meta moment?" And she's like, "The moment I need to do breathing," and I was like, so when you see that happen, and also talking about emotions, so instead of just saying, "Dad, I'm sad," or "Dad, I'm happy," like they're saying, I'm joyous or I feel lonely, right? And then you're able to fashion a response based on like more of understanding their emotions. So I actually bought in my why of social emotional is I bought in as a parent. I saw the evidence actually happening in the house. And then, so absolutely.
Yeah.
One more question and then we can conclude here. If there is one, I hope there is.
I had a quick question, actually, because I know we were talking about how we shouldn't take recess away from students. Do you think putting them in timeout is a good solution? Because I see my teacher done it, put her kids in timeout for discipline. I don't know if that's a good idea to put them in timeout to calm down, or how can we change
So
that?
I showed an example of a calm down corner. That is really important that is not part of a discipline strategy, right? So
Right.
that, you don't have, no, I don't suggest a timeout, but I do suggest like, if a kid is being really disruptive in your classroom and they will be there and they will be frustrating, right? Like, find a time to like check in with that kid, right? Like, hey, let's, okay, everybody else, like get to your reading. Hey, check in with Johnny at his desk or call him up to a desk or take him out in the hall or something where you can check in with that kid and see what's going on with them and do some listening so that you can help him or her solve their problems so that you can get it. So, taking a break, having a signal for a kid, like, maybe it's that they need to go to the calm down corner. Maybe it's just that I used to have a signal for some of my kids. They would just give me, whatever the signal was, and they would go out and they'd walk a loop around my school, like just to walk the hallways for a couple minutes and come back. And that's what they needed. And then I could have a chance to check in with them, right? So I think trying to figure out, so once you've built that relationship, you try to figure out a way to help that student to, check their behavior and to get at the root of their behavior and help them solve their problem. When they know that you're on their side and that you want to solve the problem with them, then they're going to be willing to work with you, and it'll be hopefully calm down the behavior in the future.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Lyon Terry, for taking the time to join us and do this type of format. I really appreciate it. I know not only did we take the time to do this, but I know you also prepared for this, and that takes time and takes time away from family. And so I really, really appreciate it. And on behalf of Central and all our students and teacher candidates, thank you. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Good luck to all of you. Feel free to reach out. Actually, maybe I should put it in the chat, so you can follow me on Twitter at Lyon Terry. You can email me, lion.terry@highlineschools. Did I spell that right? Yes, highlineschools.org. So happy to have, further the conversation, or if you have further questions and you want to, just explore things more, I'm happy to connect with you. So thank you all. Good luck to you. Teaching is hard. It's especially hard doing it in distance learning. So thank you for stepping up.
We'll get through this. So, all right. Thank you all. Take care. Enjoy your day.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, you guys.